There are moments in life that they carve themselves into your memory, deep and jagged like a chisel hitting stone. For me, one of those moments wasn't a triumph or a celebration. No, it was a failure, a public, soul-crushing demolition of something I had poured every fiber of my being into. It was the moment I truly understood what it meant to have your heart laid bare, only for it to be trampled underfoot. But here's the thing about being an artist. Sometimes those devastating blows, those moments of utter despair, they aren't the end. They're just the preface to something far, far greater. I remember it like it was yesterday, the air thick with the scent of cheap wine and the nervous chatter of the gallery crowd. My piece, The Weaver's Lament, stood there, under the harsh spotlight, a testament to months of sleepless nights and an almost obsessive devotion. It was a large-scale textile installation, a swirling vortex of hand-dyed silk threads, each one representing a forgotten story, a silent whisper from the past. I had painstakingly woven in found objects, faded photographs, rusted keys, brittle leaves, each element chosen with an almost spiritual reverence. The central figure, a shadowy, ethereal form, seemed to emerge from the chaos, its hands outstretched, yearning, pleading. I believed it was my masterpiece, a raw, vulnerable expression of universal grief and resilience. I truly did. The exhibition opening was a blur of forced smiles and polite nods, but I was living for the moment the critics would arrive, for the genuine reactions, the intellectual discourse. And then he walked in. Professor Alistair Finch, a name whispered with both reverence and dread in the art world. His reputation preceded him. A man whose words could make or break careers, a figure whose gaze seemed to strip away all pretense, leaving only the stark truth. He was tall, gaunt, with an impeccably tailored suit and eyes that missed nothing. My stomach clenched, a cold knot of anticipation and fear. He approached The Weaver's Lament slowly, deliberately, his footsteps echoing a little too loudly in the hushed space around my work. He didn't speak, not immediately. He just circled it, his head cocked slightly, his gaze piercing through the layers of silk and meaning I had so carefully constructed. My breath hitched in my throat. I watched his face, searching for any flicker of understanding, any hint of appreciation. There was none. Only a tightening of his lips, a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Then he spoke, his voice a low, resonant baritone that carried just enough to be heard by me and a few unfortunate souls nearby. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. His words were precise, surgical, each one landing with the weight of a hammer blow. He called it, and I quote, an overwrought exercise in maudlin sentimentality. He said the narrative was cliched, the execution amateurish, and the entire concept a desperate grab for emotional impact that ultimately felt hollow and manipulative. He even went so far as to suggest that the found objects were merely a lazy attempt to add gravitas to an otherwise unremarkable piece, a cheap trick to distract from a fundamental lack of original thought. He concluded by saying it was a piece that screamed for attention but offered no substance, a cacophony of ambition without a single note of genuine artistry. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The vibrant colors of the gallery walls blurred. The chatter of the crowd faded into a distant hum. All I could hear was his voice, those brutal, unsparing words, echoing in the hollow chamber of my chest. It wasn't just criticism. It was an indictment, a complete dismissal of my artistic voice, my very soul. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck, followed by an icy wave that left me trembling. My hands, which had so lovingly crafted every thread, every knot, felt suddenly clumsy, useless. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floorboards, to become invisible. The Weaver's Lament, which moments before had felt like an extension of myself, now seemed to mock me, its outstretched hands no longer yearning, but accusing. I don't remember much of the rest of that night. I think I made my excuses, mumbled something about feeling unwell, and fled. The crisp night air offered no solace, only a stark reminder of the chill that had settled deep within me. For days I barely left my studio apartment. The blinds were drawn, the light muted, mirroring the darkness that had consumed my mind. Every creative impulse felt stifled, crushed. The vibrant colors of my paint palette seemed dull, meaningless. The scent of linseed oil, usually a comforting aroma, now felt cloying, a reminder of my failure. I questioned everything. Was he right? Was I just a fraud, an amateur, playing at being an artist? Had I deluded myself all these years? The self-doubt was a venomous serpent, coiling tighter and tighter around my spirit, threatening to choke out any remaining spark of creativity. I tried to work. I really did. I'd pick up a brush, stare at a blank canvas, and nothing would come. Or worse, a vague, uninspired image would form, and I'd immediately hear Professor Finch's voice, dissecting it, tearing it apart before I even had a chance to begin. The joy, the passion, the almost desperate need to create that had always defined me, it was gone, replaced by a gaping void of despair and resentment. Resentment not just towards him, but towards myself, for being so vulnerable, for believing so deeply in something that was apparently so flawed. One afternoon, almost a week after the gallery opening, I found myself sitting on the floor of my studio, surrounded by discarded sketches and half-finished projects. A particularly scathing newspaper review, echoing Finch's sentiments almost verbatim, lay crumpled beside me. My eyes burned, not with tears, but with a dry, searing anger. It was a slow burn at first, a flicker in the darkness, then it began to spread, consuming the self-pity, the doubt, the paralysis. A single thought, sharp and clear, cut through the fog. He will not break me. That thought, so simple, so defiant, was the turning point. It wasn't about proving him wrong in a petty way. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, my own artistic integrity. It was about transforming that pain, that humiliation, into something undeniably powerful. The idea that began to form in my mind wasn't just a response, it was a counterattack, an artistic declaration that would use the very essence of his criticism as its fuel. If he saw cliché, I would create profound originality. If he saw amateurism, I would demonstrate mastery. If he saw hollow sentimentality, I would craft an emotional landscape so raw and visceral, it would leave no doubt about its authenticity. I stood up, slowly, feeling a strange surge of energy course through my veins. The studio, which had felt like a prison, suddenly seemed like a sanctuary, a battlefield where I would wage my creative war. I started by clearing everything away, every remnant of my previous projects. I needed a clean slate, a tabula rasa, to build something entirely new, something born from the ashes of my previous defeat. The crumpled newspaper review, instead of being thrown away, was carefully smoothed out and pinned to the wall, a constant, stark reminder of the challenge I had set for myself. It wasn't about revenge in the conventional sense, not about making him eat his words. It was about a deeper, more profound kind of artistic vindication. It was about proving to asterisk myself that my voice mattered, that my art had a purpose, even if only one person truly understood it. The concept began to coalesce, slowly at first, like swirling mist revealing a mountain peak. If The Weaver's Lament was about universal grief, this new piece would be about the process of creation itself, the agony and ecstasy, the vulnerability and resilience, the way artists transmute pain into beauty. And crucially, it would incorporate the very act of criticism, the tearing down, the rebuilding. I envisioned something that was not merely a painting or a sculpture, but an experience, an immersive journey through the artist's struggle. It needed to be monumental, not just in scale, but in its emotional and intellectual ambition. I started sketching, not with a precise image in mind, but with raw emotion. Lines slashed across the paper, dark and furious, then softened into delicate, almost invisible whispers. I explored textures, the abrasive feel of sandpaper against smooth wood, the cold resistance of metal, the yielding softness of clay. I began to think about materials in a completely different way, no longer just mediums, but symbols. The silk from the weaver's lament, which had been so gently handled, now seemed too fragile, too easily dismissed. I needed something more robust, something that could withstand blows, something that could be broken and reassembled yet still retain its integrity. My studio transformed. The gentle light that once filtered through the blinds was replaced by harsh, focused lamps, illuminating every corner, every speck of dust. My work table, usually cluttered with brushes and tubes of paint, became an organized chaos of industrial materials, sheets of steel, lengths of thick rope, shards of glass, heavy blocks of wood. I started researching, delving into the histories of materials, their symbolic meanings, their structural properties. I read about ancient Japanese kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with lacquer dusted with powdered gold, highlighting the breaks as part of the object's history rather than disguising them. This concept, the idea of embracing imperfection, of finding beauty in breakage, resonated deeply with me. It was a powerful metaphor for my own journey, for the shattered pieces of my artistic confidence now being painstakingly reassembled. The new piece began to take shape in my mind, a complex, multi-layered structure. It wouldn't be a single, static object, but a dynamic composition, an evolving narrative. I imagined a central core, perhaps something solid and unyielding, like a massive block of raw granite, representing the artist's inherent strength, their core belief. Around it, I would construct layers, each one depicting a stage of the creative process. The initial spark, the joyous flow, the inevitable struggle, the brutal critique, and ultimately, the triumphant rebirth. I spent weeks just planning, drawing schematics, calculating dimensions, sourcing materials. This wasn't just art. It was engineering, a careful orchestration of form and function, emotion and intellect. I learned about welding, about carving, about working with materials I had never touched before. My hands, once accustomed to the delicate dance of a paintbrush or the gentle pull of a thread, now learned the rough grip of a grinder, the precise strike of a chisel, the searing heat of a torch. There were cuts, burns, blisters. My body ached, but it was a good ache. A productive ache, a reminder that I was creating, building, forging something real and tangible from my pain. The first major component I tackled was the foundation, the granite block. I found a massive slab, rough-hewn and imposing, perfect for representing that unshakable core. Transporting it to my studio was an ordeal, requiring specialized equipment and a team of movers. But once it was there, sitting squarely in the center of my workspace, it felt like a silent, powerful anchor. It was the antithesis of the weaver's lament's ethereal fragility. This was gravitas, raw and undeniable. Then came the surrounding layers. I envisioned a series of panels, each one depicting a different phase. One panel, for the initial burst of inspiration, would be a swirling canvas of vibrant, unrestrained colors, painted with a furious energy, almost abstract in its joyous chaos. Another, for the struggle, would be a stark, monochromatic composition, perhaps incorporating actual elements of my discarded sketches from the dark days, torn and reassembled, scarred and imperfect. But the most crucial panel, the one that would confront the criticism head-on, was the most challenging to conceptualize. I decided to create a deconstructed, almost violent representation of the original artwork, The Weaver's Lament. Not a direct replica, but a symbolic one. I would take actual remnants of the silk, the found objects, the very materials that Finch had dismissed as cheap tricks, and I would subject them to a process of deliberate destruction and reconstruction. The silk would be shredded, burned at the edges, then meticulously rewoven into a new, distorted tapestry, threaded with strands of barbed wire and sharp, reflective shards of broken glass. The faded photographs would be torn, then painstakingly pieced back together with visible golden seams, kintsugi style, revealing their brokenness as part of their story. The rusted keys would be hammered flat, then etched with fragments of Finch's scathing words, transforming them from symbols of forgotten stories into instruments of critique. This wasn't about recreating the old piece. It was about dissecting it, exposing its wounds, and then healing them in a way that was stronger, more resilient, and undeniably more impactful. The process was cathartic, almost ritualistic. Each tear of the silk, each strike of the hammer, was a release, an exorcism of the self-doubt and anger that had festered within me. As I worked, I felt a deep connection to the materials, a sense of partnership. They were not just inert objects, they were collaborators in this act of artistic defiance. The studio became my world. Hours blurred into days, days into weeks. I ate, slept, and breathed this project. The outside world faded into insignificance. Friends called, but I rarely answered. My phone often lay forgotten, its notifications unheard. My focus was absolute, my determination unwavering. The words of Professor Finch, once a source of paralysis, had become a relentless driving force. Every time my energy flagged, every time I doubted a design choice, I would look at that crumpled newspaper review on the wall, and a fresh wave of resolve would wash over me. This wasn't just a painting or a sculpture. It was a testament, a manifesto, a declaration of artistic survival. The piece, which I had begun to call the crucible of creation, was growing in complexity and ambition. It was becoming a multimedia installation, incorporating not just physical materials, but also light and sound. I envisioned a subtle, almost subliminal soundscape, a low hum of ambient noise that would shift and change, from the gentle whisper of wind to the harsh grating of metal, reflecting the ebb and flow of the creative struggle. And light, oh the light, it would be crucial. I planned to use spotlights and projectors to cast shadows, to highlight certain elements, to create a dynamic interplay of illumination and obscurity, guiding the viewer's eye through the narrative of the piece. One evening, covered in dust and grime, my muscles aching but my spirit soaring, I stepped back from the partially assembled structure. It was still far from complete, but its raw power was already undeniable. The central granite block stood firm, surrounded by the nascent forms of the panels. The shredded silk, interwoven with metal, gleamed menacingly under the work lights. The hammered keys, etched with the critic's words, caught the light like tiny, sharp memories. It was a stark, almost brutal aesthetic, but there was an undeniable beauty in its honesty, in its vulnerability. I realized then that this wasn't just about proving Professor Finch wrong. It was about proving to myself that art could be born from destruction, that beauty could emerge from pain, that even the most cutting words could be transmuted into a catalyst for profound creation. It was about owning my narrative, not letting someone else define my worth as an artist. This new piece, The Crucible of Creation, was becoming a physical manifestation of my journey, a testament to resilience, a defiant roar in the face of adversity. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that this was just the beginning. The real work, the true unveiling of its power, was yet to come. The whispers of the art world, the expectations of critics, the opinions of others. None of it mattered as much as the unwavering conviction growing within me that this piece, forged in the crucible of my deepest despair, would be something truly extraordinary. It had to be. My artistic soul depended on it.